She just wanted peace. A quiet room in the Andes, far from her grief, her guilt, and the blood-stained memories of her sister's disappearance. But the walls of this Peruvian hostel whispered secrets in the dark. And when the screams started, they weren't unfamiliar, they were intimate. What if the horror she escaped back home had only followed her across an ocean? And what if it had always been inside the walls? The afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the cobblestone streets of Arequipa as Emily stepped out of the taxi, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a Lonely Planet guide tucked under her arm. She had always dreamed of visiting Peru, the land of ancient ruins, high mountains, and quiet, spiritual air. But this trip wasn't just about adventure. It was her way of pressing pause on a life that had spiraled too far out of control. The hostel she had booked was tucked away from the city's bustling center, nestled between two quiet stone buildings with chipped pastel paint and worn wooden doors. Hostel Luz de la Sierra, the sign read, carved into faded wood with curling letters. She pushed open the creaky gate and stepped inside. The air felt unusually still. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a fixed smile, greeted her in clipped English and handed over a rusted key on a string. "You are in room 3. Please, no loud music. We value silence here." Emily nodded, brushing it off as just a local quirk. The lobby had the charm of colonial-era architecture, arched hallways, a dusty chandelier, and murals of Incan mythology, but something about the atmosphere seemed off. The walls were too thick. The silence too deep. Her room was small but cozy, a narrow bed with a wool blanket, a desk with an old lamp, and a window overlooking a silent courtyard. She dropped her bag, sat on the bed, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The weight of exhaustion pulled at her. She had flown for nearly 20 hours and crossed several time zones. But as night fell, Emily couldn't sleep. The air grew heavier, and the silence that the receptionist had spoken about began to feel oppressive. That's when she heard it. It started as a scratching sound, like nails across drywall. Then came a soft whimper, so faint she thought she imagined it. She sat up, frozen, ears straining. It was coming from behind the wall beside her bed. Her breath caught. It didn't sound like rats or plumbing. It sounded like a human voice. A low, drawn-out whisper. Her heart pounded. She pressed her ear to the wall and heard it more clearly this time, a muffled sob. A choked scream. Then silence. Complete, crushing silence. She jerked back, nearly falling off the bed. "It's just the pipes," she whispered to herself, trying to laugh, trying to reason. But the hair on her arm stayed standing, and the coldness in the pit of her stomach refused to fade. The next morning, Emily asked the receptionist if there had been a noise problem in the night. The woman's smile didn't falter. "No. You probably dream. This place is very quiet. Always quiet." She said it as if rehearsed, with a tone that sounded more like a warning than reassurance. Brushing it off, Emily spent the day touring Arequipa, taking pictures of the volcanic mountains and visiting the Santa Catalina monastery. But the back of her mind was clouded with unease. That night, as she returned to her room, the hallway lights flickered once, then again. A strange smell, like burnt wood and metal, hung in the air. When she lay down to sleep, she told herself she wouldn't let paranoia ruin this trip. But at exactly 2:17 a.m., the noises returned. This time, it was clearer. More rhythmic. Like fists pounding on the inside of the wall. And a scream, sharper, desperate, as though someone was trapped behind the plaster, trying to claw their way out. Emily bolted upright, heart racing. She flicked on the light, but it barely flickered to life. Her skin turned clammy, and her breath shortened. The noise stopped the moment she stood. The silence returned, thick and final. She backed away from the wall, stared at it like it might open up and swallow her. What was going on in this place? Why did it feel like something was alive inside the very structure of the building? The next morning, Emily met a young German traveler in the kitchen, sipping mate tea and frowning at the ceiling. "Did you hear it too?" he asked without preamble. She blinked. "What?" "The screaming. From the walls." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone, not even herself fully admitted it. But now, someone else had heard it too. "This place is strange," he said, glancing around. I think something happened here. Something bad. Emily didn't know it yet, but that single sentence would mark the beginning of a descent into a mystery far darker than she ever expected. Emily didn't come to Peru just to see the mountains or taste the food. She came to escape. Most people thought she was adventurous, spontaneous even, but in truth, she was running from the cold hands of grief, from the echo of her sister Lily's voice calling her name in her dreams. A year ago, Lily vanished. No note. No sign. Her last known location was a meditation retreat in the mountains of California. They found her car, her suitcase, and her journal, but never her body. Police said maybe she'd run off. Maybe she'd chosen to disappear. But Emily knew better. The last entry in Lily's journal was a warning: they come at night. Listen to the walls. It haunted Emily for months, playing on a loop in her mind, until her therapist finally suggested a change of scenery. That's when Emily booked the trip. Peru was far, different, and removed from everything that had swallowed her at home. But now, here, as she stared at the walls of this hostel, she began to wonder if the nightmare had followed her. The German traveler, Felix, seemed trustworthy. He had an open face, a concerned tone, and he wasn't the type to make up ghost stories. He told her he'd been staying in the hostel for 3 nights and hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time. The noises came only after midnight. Always in the walls. First whispers, then cries, then violent pounding. It sounds like someone begging to be let out, he whispered, leaning close. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. That night, they stayed in the lounge past midnight, whispering, listening. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the sound began again. Faint. Soft. Like cloth dragging across brick. Then came the weeping, quiet at first, then sharper. Felix paled. Emily gripped the edge of the table, her nails pressing into the wood. We have to see what's behind those walls, she said. But it wasn't just about the hostel anymore. The sounds were waking something in her, dredging up memories she had buried so deep she thought they'd disappeared. The last time she saw Lily, they'd argued. Lily said she was going to seek healing, a deeper truth, something spiritual. Emily had rolled her eyes, told her she was wasting her time chasing shadows. Lily had walked away in tears. Emily never got to say sorry. Never got to say goodbye. Now, being in this place, hearing whispers behind walls, she remembered that warning in Lily's journal. They come at night. What if it hadn't been a metaphor? What if Lily had experienced something real, something terrible, and now Emily was walking in her footsteps? The next day, Emily searched her email for the scanned copy of Lily's journal. Her therapist had sent it to her months ago, thinking it might help with closure. Emily had never dared read past the first page. But now, her fingers trembling, she opened the file and scrolled through the final entries. Each one more frantic than the last. They stand behind the walls and listen. When you sleep, they watch. Another read, I heard someone calling my name from behind the mirror. Emily dropped her phone. Her heart thudded in her chest. These entries weren't written in California. She checked the IP log attached to the file metadata. One entry. Logged from Arequipa, Peru. Emily sat frozen. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her sister had been here. Not just in spirit. Not just as a memory. But physically here. In this very town. Maybe even in this hostel. She ran to the front desk and asked the receptionist if anyone named Lily had stayed there. The woman's smile faded slightly. We don't keep old guest lists, she said. Too many names. You understand. But her eyes darted to the wall behind Emily before she turned and walked away. That glance wasn't casual. It was fear. Or guilt. Or both. That evening, Emily checked the room for any hidden markings, anything that might connect to Lily. She moved the bed, inspected the floorboards, even tapped along the walls like in the mystery shows her sister used to love. And then, near the baseboard behind the desk, she found something, barely visible under layers of dust. A heart, carved in the wood, with the letters E+L inside. It was their childhood symbol. They used to draw it in their books, on trees, even in the dirt during summer hikes. It was their sisterhood stamp. Only they knew it. Emily's knees gave out, and she sat on the floor, tears rolling down her cheeks. Lily had been here. She had left a sign. She had been inside this very room. Suddenly, the air in the room turned icy. The overhead light flickered. Emily stood up, her skin crawling. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the bed with her back to the wall, flashlight in hand, waiting. At 2:17 a.m. sharp, the screaming began. But this time, it wasn't random. This time, the voice said a name. Her name. Emily. Over and over. A cry. A warning. A goodbye. By the fourth night, the atmosphere inside the hostel had shifted completely. What once felt eerie now felt suffocating. The building seemed to pulse with a low, humming dread. The walls no longer felt like barriers, they felt like skin. Alive. Listening. Breathing. The staff continued their smiling silence, always polite but avoiding any questions about the history of the building. Emily asked if the hostel had ever been a school or hospital, trying to get answers indirectly, but was met with the same gentle deflections. It's always been a place of rest, the receptionist said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That same night, Emily and Felix decided to stay awake again. They set up chairs in the hallway, coffee in hand, flashlights ready. At 2:13 a.m., the first sound came. A soft creak. A hush. A distant dragging noise. Then, just as before, the screams began. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Crying. Screaming. Pleading. The voices overlapped, each one different. Some sounded male. Others female. A child, maybe two. The sounds came from inside the walls, underneath the floors, above the ceiling. Felix stood, flashlight shaking in his hand. Emily grabbed his arm. We have to find where it's coming from. He nodded, pale but determined. They followed the sound down the hallway to a door at the end marked private. It was always locked, but tonight, the latch hung loose. Felix pushed it open, and they stepped into a narrow corridor lined with stone. It wasn't on the map of the hostel they'd seen in the lounge. This part of the building didn't exist, at least, not officially. The hallway was cold, and the walls were lined with old photos. Dust-covered frames held faded pictures of people, guests, maybe staff, but some faces were scratched out. Others had dark stains over them, like water damage or something worse. At the far end was a bricked-up doorway, uneven and hurried. The screaming was louder now, but muffled, like it was trapped behind that wall. Emily ran her hand across the bricks, feeling for a hollow spot. Felix noticed something in the corner, a small wooden box with strange markings burned into it. Inside was a bundle of pages, yellowed and brittle, written in frantic, looping handwriting. Spanish. Felix translated slowly, whispering each line like it was forbidden. They come at night. They choose one. The walls remember. The walls feed. Emily's blood ran cold. That night, Felix decided to move his mattress into Emily's room. Neither of them felt safe alone anymore. They talked in whispers, piecing together the meaning of what they had read. The journal pages spoke of rituals, of offerings, of disappearances covered up as travelers lost in the Andes. The building, according to the pages, was more than a hostel, it was a gate. Emily didn't understand what that meant exactly, but the fear sat heavy in her chest. She wondered how many other guests had stayed in this place and left without knowing what they were sleeping beside. Or worse, how many had never left at all. At breakfast, Felix tried to ask the kitchen staff about the private corridor. The man behind the counter dropped the spoon he was holding. It clattered to the floor and rolled under the table. He didn't answer, just walked into the back room and didn't return. Emily looked around and realized something else. Of the 5 other guests she'd seen check in 2 days ago, only one was still there. A French woman who seemed jumpy and refused to talk. That afternoon, Emily went to look for Felix to plan their next move. His room was empty. His bed untouched. His bag was gone, and the staff claimed he had checked out. But his passport was still in the drawer. She knew he hadn't left. Something had taken him. That night, Emily sat alone, terrified and furious. She held the journal pages in her lap and listened to the sounds behind the walls growing louder by the minute. She recorded the noises on her phone, uploaded them to a cloud drive, and sent a message to her best friend back home. If something happens to me, it's because of this place. Listen to the recording. Don't trust anyone. As the clock struck 2:17 a.m., the scream came again. But now it was different. It wasn't just pain, it was rage. The voice behind the wall screamed her name again, only this time, louder, more urgent. Emily! Let me out! Her heart stopped. It sounded like Felix. Or maybe her sister. Or both. The line between hallucination and reality began to blur. The mirrors in her room reflected shadows that didn't move with her. The window showed fog rolling into the courtyard, even though it hadn't rained. She stuffed the journal pages into her backpack, grabbed her flashlight, and ran to the bricked-up wall. She banged on it, shouting Felix's name, shouting Lily's name, shouting into the stone. The scream that came back to her was so loud and sharp it made the light bulb above her burst. Glass shattered to the ground. She fell backward and hit her head, everything going black for a second. When she came to, she wasn't alone. There was something breathing behind the wall. Slow. Steady. Waiting. Emily didn't sleep after the light bulb exploded. Her head still throbbed from the fall, but the pain was distant compared to the fear creeping deeper into her bones. She sat against the far wall of her room, the flashlight flickering weakly, her backpack clutched to her chest. Every creak in the old building made her flinch. The breathing sound she had heard behind the bricks, slow and patient, never returned, but its memory hovered in the air. At dawn, she went to the reception desk. A new man was there, someone she hadn't seen before. She asked for Felix again, more urgently this time. The man didn't blink. There is no guest by that name. Maybe you're mistaken. He smiled, but it was too calm, too controlled. She demanded to see the guest registry. He shrugged. We don't keep paper logs anymore. But Emily had seen the notebook on the first day, pages curled with age, names scribbled in different handwriting. Now it was gone. She left the hostel and walked through the streets of Arequipa, not knowing where to go. The sky was bright and blue, people laughed in cafes, and children played near the monastery. It didn't make sense that something so terrifying was hiding inside such beauty. She stopped at a small internet cafe and used one of the computers to research the hostel. There were reviews, dozens of them, but many ended abruptly, or were oddly vague. One mentioned loud noises at night. Another talked about strange dreams. But none gave details. Then she found a post on an old travel forum from 7 months ago. The title read, "Don't stay at Luz de la Sierra Hostel. My friend disappeared." The post had only a few lines before it was removed, but Emily screenshotted it just in time. Her hands trembled as she read it again. She heard screaming. We both did. She went to talk to the staff and never came back. I left the next morning. They told me she had checked out. But her shoes were still under the bed. Emily felt sick. She went to the police station, thinking someone had to listen. But when she mentioned the hostel's name, the officer at the desk gave her a blank stare. "That place is not open anymore," he said. She frowned. "It is. I'm staying there right now." He shook his head slowly. "It closed last year. After an accident." When she asked for details, he stood and left the room. Another officer came in and told her they couldn't help her without evidence. No one filed a missing persons report. No one saw anything. She wasn't even in the official system as staying at that address. Emily left feeling invisible. Either someone was covering it up, or something deeper was happening. Back at the hostel, she noticed something else. There were no guests anymore. Not a single one. The French woman she'd seen that morning was gone. The 2 backpackers who were on the terrace the first day had vanished too. Their beds stripped. Their rooms locked. She felt like the building was closing in around her. Every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep. Every shadow lingered too long. She returned to the hidden corridor with the bricked wall. This time, she brought a knife she'd found in the kitchen, just in case. She tapped the bricks, trying to find one that was hollow. Then, at the corner where the wall met the floor, she noticed a patch where the bricks were newer, smoother. She scraped at it and found one loose enough to pull free. Behind it was darkness, then something hard and cold, metal. She reached in and pulled out a chain. At the end of it was a pendant, old, cracked, and familiar. It was her sister Lily's. Her hands shook as she stared at it. She knew it without question. Lily wore it every day since she was 15, a silver oval with a flower pressed in glass. The necklace had been a gift from their grandmother. She never took it off. Emily sank to the floor, pressing the pendant to her forehead. Her heart raced with grief and horror. Lily had been here. Not just in Arequipa. Not just in Peru. But in this very hostel. Maybe behind that wall. Maybe right now. Emily cried, silent and desperate. She didn't know what had happened to her sister, but she knew now it wasn't an accident. She didn't just vanish. She had been taken, just like Felix. The pages they'd found, the stories of guests disappearing, the officer who insisted the hostel was closed, it all pointed to something horrifying. It wasn't just that the hostel was hiding its past. It was still doing the very thing it had always done. Feeding. Waiting. Taking. Emily read the journal entries again. They mentioned a name, El Susurro. The whisper. The entity that lived between the walls. Not a ghost. Not a person. But something ancient. Something fed by pain and silence. It took the ones who listened. Who knew. Who stayed. Emily realized she had to leave, but not without proof. She grabbed her phone, returned to the secret corridor, and filmed everything. The journal, the necklace, the scratches on the walls, the screams recorded each night. She uploaded them all to the cloud. Just as she turned to leave, a voice whispered behind her. You shouldn't have found this. It was soft. Close. Inside her ear. But no one was there. She ran, heart pounding, up the stairs, through the hall, down into the courtyard. She threw up in the bushes, the world spinning around her. The sky looked wrong. The air tasted like iron. She collapsed on the ground, too dizzy to move, staring at the building that had swallowed her friend. That had swallowed her sister. That had tried to swallow her too. Emily sat on the cold floor of the courtyard, her body trembling from a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and the unbearable weight of truth. The necklace in her hand felt like a lifeline, like a final message sent through time from her sister. Everything inside her screamed to run, to escape while she still could. But something deeper, something louder, told her she wasn't done yet. She couldn't leave with just questions. She needed to know. She needed to see what was behind that wall. She needed to know what had happened to Lily. So as the shadows of the afternoon stretched into the long fingers of dusk, Emily pulled herself to her feet, clutched her phone and the flashlight tight, and returned to the corridor that had swallowed so many before her. This time, she brought tools, an old hammer she'd found in a locked supply closet, a screwdriver, a flashlight with new batteries, and her resolve, sharpened by grief and fury. Back at the bricked-up wall, the air was different. Heavier. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath. She pulled out the first loose brick, then another, scraping her hands raw as dust filled the air. Her shoulders ached, and her fingers cramped, but she didn't stop. She clawed through the wall like it was a tomb, each brick revealing more darkness behind it. After what felt like an hour, she had cleared enough to squeeze through. What lay beyond the bricks was a narrow passage, unlit and freezing. The walls here were stone and dirt, not the polished wood and plaster of the hostel above. She crouched low, her flashlight sweeping across the cramped space. That's when she saw it, a door. It wasn't a normal door. It was old, made of thick wood and reinforced with rusted iron bars. Scratches marred its surface, deep and erratic, like someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out. Her breath caught. She reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but it turned with a groan. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber. The flashlight shook in her hand as the beam fell across the room. It was small, maybe 8 feet across, with stone walls and no windows. Chains hung from iron rings bolted into the floor and ceiling. Stains marked the stones beneath them. In the far corner, a mattress sat, torn, mouldy, and soaked in something dark that had long since dried. But what made her knees buckle was what sat in the center of the room. A pile of personal items. Necklaces. Watches. Small journals. Passport covers. Dozens of them. All belonging to people who had never checked out. Her hand flew to her mouth as she recognized one of the notebooks. It was Lily's. The same handwriting. The same childish sticker on the front cover. Her sister had been here. Chained. Hidden. Forgotten. Emily collapsed beside the pile, flipping open the journal. The entries were disjointed, scrawled like someone writing in the dark. They don't feed you. They make you listen. You become part of the walls. You scream, but no one hears. Except the ones who will join you. Emily sobbed, her face buried in the pages, wishing she could reach through time and pull her sister out of this place. Then came the sound. A soft knock. Not from the door. From inside the wall behind her. She froze, heart hammering. Knock. 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 Slow. Steady. She turned and pointed the flashlight at the wall. Nothing. Then, a whisper. Her name. Emily. Soft. Familiar. Lily's voice. Her head snapped toward the sound, tears streaming down her face. Lily, she called out. But the voice didn't return. Only the silence. Thick and cruel. She pressed her hand to the wall, shaking. I'm here. I'm here now. The wall was cold. Dead. And yet, she could feel something pulsing behind it. Something alive. She backed out of the chamber, dragging the journals and passports with her. As she re-entered the corridor, the air grew colder. Her flashlight flickered again. A shadow passed across the wall, just for a second, but it was enough. She ran. Up the stairs. Down the hallway. Into her room. She slammed the door shut and shoved a chair under the knob. Her hands moved fast, uploading the photos and files, backing everything up to the cloud. The sounds returned almost instantly. This time, not just whispers. Screams. Bangs. Dozens of voices, all around her, as if the walls were alive and mourning. She clutched Lily's journal to her chest and screamed into the air, I'm not afraid of you. The noise stopped. Just like that. Silence dropped like a curtain. The only sound was her heavy breathing. But the silence was worse. It felt like the moment before a wave crashes. Like something was preparing. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat with her back to the door, hammer in hand, waiting for whatever came next. But nothing did. At sunrise, she packed everything. She didn't shower. Didn't eat. She just left. Walked straight out the front gate, never looking back. The receptionist was gone. The desk empty. The building completely silent. She went to the police again. Showed them the files. The photos. The items. This time, they listened. Or at least, pretended to. They took her statement. Promised an investigation. But the next day, the hostel was gone. Not physically, it was still there, but it had changed its name. New paint. New staff. No records. When she asked about the old hostel, no one had heard of it. No reports were filed. No case opened. It was like it never existed. Emily didn't stop walking until her legs gave out. She made it to the edge of the city by mid-morning, far from the hostel's suffocating walls. She found a small cafe near the bus terminal and sat at the very back, her hands still trembling. The sun outside was warm, but she couldn't feel it. The light felt fake, like the world was pretending everything was fine. She ordered water, but couldn't drink it. Her stomach twisted every time she remembered that hidden room, the chains, the pile of passports, the sound of her name being whispered from inside the wall. She looked around the cafe and noticed something strange. Every table was full, but no one was talking. Everyone was looking at their phones, or their plates, or the window. It was quiet. Too quiet. Just like the hostel. She pulled out her own phone and checked her cloud backup again. All the photos were still there. The journals. The bricks. The list of names. And most important of all, the video she had recorded as she opened the secret room. It wasn't long, just under 2 minutes, but it captured the chain. The scratches. The whispers. Proof. But when she tapped play, the screen went black. An error message popped up. File corrupted. She froze. Tried again. The same error. She checked another photo of Lily's journal. The image flickered, then vanished. One by one, the files disappeared from her drive. Her heart started racing. She knew what this meant. Someone, or something, was still watching. Still erasing. Still silencing. She backed up everything again, this time to an encrypted drive. Then she emailed a copy to 3 people she trusted, including a journalist she had met once during a college internship. Just in case. Just so the truth wouldn't vanish completely. Then, she bought the next bus ticket out of Arequipa. No destination planned. Just out. As far as possible. The ride through the mountains was long and winding. As she looked out the window, she expected to feel relief. Freedom. Closure. But instead, there was a heaviness inside her that she couldn't shake. She had escaped the hostel. But she hadn't escaped the scream. It echoed in her ears like a memory burned into her soul. It wasn't just the fear of what she'd seen, it was the truth she now carried. The building was still standing. Its name had changed, but the walls remained. The same walls that took her sister. The same walls that took Felix. The same walls that would keep taking more unless someone stopped them. But no one wanted to believe her. The police had already dismissed the case. The files were already disappearing. And the locals remained silent. Over the next few weeks, Emily stayed on the move. Hostels, buses, cafes, always looking over her shoulder. She never returned to the same place twice. At night, she kept the lights on. At 2:17 a.m., she never slept. Sometimes she thought she could hear the faint scratching again, even in buildings far from Arequipa. One night, in a hostel in Chile, she heard someone crying through the walls. She checked out before sunrise. She started noticing signs, old bricks in new buildings, scratched doors with iron locks, smiling staff who were too quiet. It was everywhere. Or maybe it had just followed her. Maybe once you heard the screaming, you were never truly alone again. She called the journalist and explained everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't hang up. He asked questions. Serious ones. He asked for proof, and she sent him everything. Within days, he flew to Peru and visited the hostel. Or tried to. Because when he got there, the lot was empty. No building. No bricks. Just a blank patch of dirt with a metal fence. He sent her a photo. Nothing remained. No luz de la sierra. No evidence. Just an empty lot, as if the building had never existed. But Emily knew better. The hostel didn't disappear. It moved. Just like it had before. It hid itself again, waiting for the next traveler who needed peace and found something else instead. Something they would never escape. Back in the US, Emily tried to rebuild her life. She got a job at a bookstore. Moved into a quiet apartment. Told no one about what happened. But sometimes, at night, she'd hear it. Not loud. Not clear. But always at 2:17 a.m. A knock. A whisper. A scream. She started keeping her phone by her bed with the flashlight on. She kept a hammer near the door. She learned how to sleep with one ear open. Just in case. She never found Lily's body. Never found Felix. But she kept their journals, wrapped in plastic, hidden under her bed. One night, while flipping through Lily's pages, she found a line she hadn't noticed before. It was written between 2 margins, sideways. Almost like it had been added in a hurry. If you find me, don't try to save me. Just leave. Emily stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the book and cried. Now, years later, the story still haunts her. She doesn't tell it often. When she does, people think it's just a ghost story. Just a traveler's tale. But every so often, she gets an email from someone she's never met. A girl in Argentina. A boy in India. A couple in Romania. They all write the same thing. We heard it too. The screaming in the walls. And Emily writes back the same reply every time. Get out. Don't wait. Don't dig. Don't ask. Just leave.